I really appreciate you guys being so dedicated to this channel. So thank you guys for coming back to This is Spiritual. Today we're speaking about the coming water crisis. I want to thank you guys that were a part of the last video that we put up. And in that last video, we spoke about the civil rights violations regarding medication and chemicals in drinking water. But today what we're talking about is the governmental and corporate privatization of drinking water. So we'll jump right into it. When you ask U.S. voters what's the most important service in your life, 95% of those voters put the water system in first place. And that takes first place followed by electricity, followed by heat, internet, cell phone, cable, cooling systems, and things like that, respectively. So today we're talking about a deep dive into an example of how government and corporations are privatizing drinking water today. All right. So when you look at water everywhere, from rivers to ice caps on the side of a mountain to oceans, wetlands, lakes, things like that, and the life that relies on them, they're all pretty much at risk around the world because there's a variety of stresses on these water systems. And these stresses include overfishing of water, pollution, pesticide runoff, introduction to exotic species, and things like that. So that's, again, what we'll be expanding on today. So let's jump right into it. So I know you see a picture of the dam in the background. So you look at high in the Himalayan mountains, it's what's dubbed as the water towers of Asia. So 7 of the continent's greatest rivers start life throughout Asia. What begins as, again, an ice cap on the side of a mountain, from the snow melt, a snow melt in the Tibetan plateau, it builds into a mighty river that flows across the Chinese borders before eventually reaching to South Asia. Now notice we said the Chinese borders and not all of Asia, right? So it builds into a mighty river that's in China, and then it eventually reaches South Asia. So hidden in plain sight, what a lot of people just won't see flying over, driving by, it's pretty much an intimidating weapon when you think about it, because it holds a quarter of the world's population hostage without firing a single shot, right? So we look at much attention that we place on any nation's arsenal of weapons, but a formidable opponent that we allow to escape just our line of view is pretty much dams. Now, why do we say that? So with possessing over 87,000 dams and the Tibetan Plateau, which is the source of 10 major rivers, which 2 billion people depend on, the Chinese definitely have a formidable weapon, like we just mentioned, right? Because with the flip of a switch, they can release millions of gallons of water from their mega dams, and this would cause catastrophic flooding. This would cause pretty much all types of, or they could flip a switch and they could shut off the millions of gallons that would naturally flow through. And this will then what? This will cause a drought. Right? So to satisfy their demand for electricity as a part of a shift away from harsher emitting resources, they've pretty much gone on a dam building spree. Because when you consider in 1949, they had less than 40 small hydroelectric dams, but now they have thousands of dams, more dams than the United States, Canada, and Brazil combined. So you look on the upper Mekong alone, China has 7 mega dams with plans to build 21 additional more. So think about that, 7 mega dams, and they again control millions of water supply that naturally would just flow all throughout Asia, including South Asia. That's not a Chinese territory, but they're controlling them and they have plans to build more, right? So just one of the latest dams is capable of producing more hydropower than all of Vietnam and Thailand's dams combined. So think about that just for size comparison, right? All right, so let's just get into the effects of dams. Again, we spoke about droughts and floods, but let's look at it just deeper. So dams can be they can unleash their fury during events like what? Earthquakes, accidents, whether it's intentional or not. Destruction is easy against a dam. All right, so it can easily be used against India during the time of war. So China's southern neighbors, they're pretty much not worried without a reason. So India in times past blamed China for sudden discharges of dams. And we see, and this left over 50,000 people home. We definitely see what's going on between the tension between India and China. So it's important to see the life-sustaining resources that each government entity controls, because it ultimately controls the people, right? So a discharge by a dam near Vietnam will have a domino effect through the whole system, causing huge damages. In addition to floods, Chinese dams, they're also believed to be responsible for worsening droughts, which we spoke about. Vietnam pleaded with China to release water during, from a dam to ease severe water shortages downstream, and China agreed, and they allowed their dams to be open. In Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam all received portions of water supplies. Vietnam first had to plead with the Chinese government to be able to impact their environment. So that's something to think about. So these two extremes, they don't only highlight the environmental impact from China, but they also serve as a stark reminder of China's influence over its southern neighbors. So again, when you consider these rivers are foundational to life throughout South Asia, providing drinking water, irrigation systems for farming, and habitats for fisheries, and other transportations for commerce, it's extremely important to these people. All right, so we spoke about pretty much the effect. Let's just take a deeper dive into that, and now we'll talk about the worsening drought. So by controlling the flow of the lifeblood for any region, but now we're talking about they're able to gain immense power, and oftentimes this has led to accusations of abuse, right? So China, in times past, they've denied such things as a water war exists. However, when you look at the fact that they don't want to share their hydrological with India, that's kind of a contradiction, because this data is critical during things like monsoon season. So since this data is so critical, what does it do? Well, you can also consider that this data is life-saving, because when you're considering flood season, monsoon season, anything that deals with water, you're able to project what do we do about our homeless population? What do we do about our poor and underfunded population? And sometimes it's hard to do when you don't have certain data and statistics in place. What's surprising is China herself suffers from unclean drinking water. So you would think the government would definitely understand. Each year in northern China, the water table drops. In China, 80% of major rivers have become so horribly polluted that they don't support any aquatic life at all at this point. So here's a conflict. As water scarcity worsens with climate change and population increase, the need for this precious resource will grow. So that again amplifies China's power, and it intensifies the conflict that we were speaking about. So the harsh reality is, despite the best efforts for the region and the partnerships in South Asian nations, they've had no success in getting or encouraging sustainable and responsible development of river from China. So again, the harsh reality is, despite regional partnerships in South Asia, they've had little success on encouraging sustainable and responsible development of the rivers throughout Asia. The life-sustaining rivers, remember, there's 7 major ones that, they start at the top of a mountain, the ice cap at the top of a mountain. And now they flow into mighty rivers that flow through China and then the rest of South Asia. So one can say, hey, we're privileged, we're blessed that these waters are right behind us and they flow through. But now the question of morality and responsibility comes into play. All right, so we'll move right along. So we mentioned it quite a few times, but let's really talk about the coming water crisis. All right, so we spoke about Asia. Let's talk about America. So just pretty much progressing into the U.S. state of mind. Most Americans, they're not too concerned about water stress areas, water shortages, because the water consumed in North America is pretty much fresher than anywhere else at this point. And to be honest with you, people who feel that way, they will be right about that. But the truth is, even North America is rapidly running out of clean drinking water, and it's going to change all of our lives once this really starts to take effect. So today, the most important underground water source in America is the Agala water. It's a tongue twister for me. It's the Agala Aquifer, right? And it's rapidly running dry. The most important lake in the western United States is Lake Mead, and that's also rapidly running dry. The most important river in the western United States is the Colorado River, and that's rapidly running dry. Putting our heads in the sand and pretending that we're not on the verge of something absolutely horrific, because again, water is a life-sustaining resource. It's not going to make this crisis go away, because without water, we can't grow crops, we can't raise livestock, and we can't support market modern cities if we don't have water, right? So as this global crisis keeps getting worse, it's going to affect all of us. Every single man, woman, and child on this planet. Gala Aquifer is rapidly running dry. And you can see the contaminations in its water supply. But even though that the interior part of the U.S. is the driest it's ever been in 500 years, we also have to consider the wildfires. The wildfires burning throughout the U.S. The dust storms that it creates in the future. So unfortunately, science tells us that it's normal for the extreme dry conditions that we see in the U.S. to continue to persist. So how I feel, I can't speak for everybody, but how I feel is that little's being done about this major issue. All right, so on this one, this is again Lake Mead. I've been here before, so I've seen it, and it looks just like that. You would think it's by design, but that's literally the difference between where the water supply used to be and old rock formations. All right, so experts tell us that the U.S. water bills are likely to soar in the coming years. It's been projected that repairing and expanding our decaying water supply infrastructure will cost trillions of dollars over the next 25 years. As a result of that, of course, our water bills are likely to soar. So right now, the U.S. uses approximately 148 trillion gallons of fresh water a year, and there's no way that's sustainable in the long run. So according to this report that I have from the U.S. government, 36 states are already facing water shortages or will be facing water shortages within the next few years. And again, going back to Lake Mead supplies 85% of the water supply in Las Vegas. So since 1998, the level of water in Lake Mead has dropped 5.6 trillion gallons. All right, so we mentioned it, but yeah, of course, the United States is in far better shape than the rest of the world when it comes to fresh water. This chart right here, this map I have, it pretty much shows you the difference in water-stressed areas between 1995 to 2025, but also the global and physical economic water scarcity. So you see again areas that have little to no water scarcity and areas that have an economic water scarcity or approaching a physical water scarcity. So something to think about, and please do definitely fact check everything I'm saying. Do your research. I wouldn't lie to you. But yeah, I mean, we know that America is definitely in better shape than the rest of the world when it comes to water scarcity. The total global water use has pretty much quadrupled over the past 100 years, and now it's increasing faster than it has ever. Every 8 seconds somewhere in the world, a child dies from drinking dirty water. And what's crazy is this could be prevented if the parents had access to clean drinking water. So again, every 8 seconds, a child dies from dirty drinking water, but every 8 seconds, a child wouldn't die if the parents had access to clean drinking water. Does that make sense? All right, so today there are 1.6 billion people living in areas across the globe that are considered water stressed, and this is projected to be 2/3 of their entire population by again year 2025. So it's also being projected that the demand for water in China will exceed the water supply by 20%, by 25% by year 2030. So according to the United Nations, the world is going to need at least 30% more fresh water by year 2030. So sadly, it's estimated that 40% of children living in Africa or India, they've had their growth stunted due to unclean drinking water and malnutrition. And of 60 million people added to world cities each year, the vast majority of them, they depend on deeply impoverished areas that have no sanitation facilities whatsoever. All right, so let's speak about the water privatization conflict, right? So imagine this. You have a crop that will not be able to survive through a drought. So now you want to GMO the crop. You want to genetically modify the crop to be drought resistant. You would need to then privatize drinking water to be able to test water, test crops, test drought scenarios, or maybe you provide sanitation services and you want to privatize the drinking water supply. So in the name of purifying it, and now you're selling it back to the community in which the water supply belongs to. Well, you look at the IMF, and if you look at the World Bank, they're trying to privatize the world's largest drinking water supplies. What can they do with this? Well, they can bring water supplies to communities that they feel like need it. They can, as we see with the Chinese government, they can withhold it until nations make decisions that are more favorable to the UN, to these private companies. Say you don't get the shot, right? Say you didn't agree with somebody's political thoughts. All of a sudden, is your community affected by the water, or is your community affected by how much water it can receive? Progress toward water-stressed environments, and as we continue to move toward, this is just some of the things that we definitely need to consider. Another thing that we need to consider is water must be free for substance use. I'll say it again: water must be free for substance needs and use. Since nature gives us water at free cost, buying and selling it for profit violates our inherent right to nature's gifts, and it also denies the poor their human rights. Private companies often violate standard of operations, and they also engage in fixed prices without many consequences. This leads to water-stressed areas among poor populations. This leads to water-stressed areas among poor populations, and it includes drinking water, because the drinking water that we know can be very contaminated. The drinking water that we know can be very hazardous to a poor population's community. And it's even through case studies, it is shown that privatized drinking water can cause or can be very contaminated as well. When a company tries to make a large profit through water or through high water prices, it denies the poor the inalienable right to the most necessity substance for life. Water is a common resource, so it can't be owned, or water is a common resource, so it should not be owned. It should not be privatized and sold as a commodity. Because then you have to ask yourself, how can one justify claiming the water supplies they're owned through contractual agreement while letting another human go thirsty? And we mentioned that water is a commons, but it's a commons because it's the basis of all life, right? Water rights are natural rights, and that means that it shouldn't be used against a person. The rights of water shouldn't be used against people. Well, water is not necessarily being used against people, right? But that also means water should be used, but it shouldn't be owned. Because again, I shouldn't be able to sign a contractual agreement and now own a large water supply while another human being goes thirsty. As far-fetched as water ownership may seem to some people, it's happening all around the globe. And it's happening at an increased rate all around the globe. So I want to take a look at an example. We'll take a look at the Ghana government in Africa. So they increasingly give pressure and way to water privatization. But we see through this water privatization, it's causing the citizens of Ghana to have to spend 50% of their earnings on water purchases. Imagine spending 50% of everything you make on a purchase of water. So you would think, hey, this has got to be unpopular with a lot of, right? But the rush for water privatization, it's continued pretty much uncumbered, because despite its popularity, the conversations are not being had amongst your average everyday citizens. They're being had at the United Nations. They're being had with Coca-Cola, Nestle. They're not being had with you and I. So when you look at countries, right? Now, watch the play, watch the bait and switch. When you look at countries that are faced with large debts, they're pretty much forced from the people that they get loans from. This would be the World Bank and the IMF. They're pretty much forced to privatize their water supply. So then they advocate for water deregulation as a common demand, as their loan conditions. In 2000, it sounds funny because we're in 2022, but in 2000, out of 40 IMF loans distributed through the International Finance Corporation, 12 requirements of partial or full privatization of water supply was required. They also insisted for the creation of policies to stimulate full cost recovery and the elimination to subsidize. I don't know why I just like slides like this, or not even slides like this, but pictures and examples like this. We spoke about privatization of water. We spoke about what foreign nations are doing to control water. But let's speak about what our own military is doing to change our water supply. Now, before I get started, is the military through these actions, are they trying to harm people? I'm not saying that. I will comment on the harmful side effects of what they're doing in our atmosphere, in our water supply, through iron input. So I'm gonna read this. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers claimed that from research, flooding worldwide takes an estimate 25,000 lives and is responsible for economic losses that add up to 60 billion annually. Over the past 2 decades, scientists have been using cheap methods called ocean fertilization, that is dumping of iron dust into the ocean in order to stimulate growth of CO2 breathing plankton, photon plankton. Under guidelines of the UNESCO, ocean fertilization is conducted under the assumption that they are adding nutrients or increasing the nutrient supply from deep water. So when we look at it, they're polluting the ocean with iron, a bunch of toxic metals. So small scale experiments have been done to confirm that iron seeding of the ocean does promote photon plankton growth, but yet ocean fertilizations can cause catastrophic effects, such as creating oxygen depleted dead zones in the world's ocean. And now we have these fish that are dead in the ocean, and now they're contaminating the water supply. Or the chemical mixtures of the two has become toxic, become harmful. And now every 8 seconds, a child dies of unclean drinking water. So before we close, this slide is the most frustrating slide out of my deck. I can't lie. And I know you can't see me right now, but yeah, this slide is the most frustrating out of my deck. So the corporate takeover of drinking water. Private companies such as Coca-Cola and Nestle, and I know we spoke about these before, but they're allegedly in the process of privatizing the largest reserve of water, known as the Guarani. Somebody say that in the comment section. Tell me how to break it down. The Guarani Aquifer in South America. The aquifer is located beneath the surface of Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. It is the second largest known aquifer system in the world. These are the people, my friend, that we should definitely be boycotting. Boycotts, they've been very effective as public awareness campaigns, but citizens need to also apply pressure on their government as a first step to stop the proliferation of voluntary initiatives that nobody ever asked for. Right. So again, we need to boycott, but also apply pressure, okay? So demanding regulation of private sectors, products from water to natural resource commodification and financial instruments, as well as the public's political electives appearing to have this as a first principle. That's what we need to do. We need to boycott where we can, apply pressure to our government to stop this voluntary initiative that, again, we didn't sign up for. We also need to demand regulation on these private sectors that profit off of water and natural resource commodification. And as well as we need to make sure that any politician that says that they're for the people, they're for water being a natural right, God-given right. That's what we need to do. That's the call to action. So a senior advisor on water to the 63rd president of the United Nations General Assembly said every 8 seconds a child dies of waterborne diseases, in every case preventable if their parents had access to clean water and if adequate sanitation was available. So we see that the conversations are being had even at the United Nations. We also saw on Wednesday, July 28th, 41 countries have abstained in the United Nations vote on the Bolivia resolution to recognize access to water and sanitation as a basic human right. So 41 countries said they weren't even going to sign it. So how can you support resolutions like this? Well, you can check out websites like blueplanetproject.net. You can contact your government. You can contact your UN representatives and the world leaders who oppose this resolution. That's something that you can do. So I'm gonna leave you all with the question, all right? So the question is, what does a country do when they're being strangled by debt? Well, the answer is they borrow more money. So when we look at the U.S. infrastructure continuing to fail, we can definitely see the areas where the U.S. could begin to ask for more money. Once the U.S. begins to ask for more money, then the water supply will be privatized. if that makes any sense. And we all know that when a globalist wants to invade a country, they do so on multiple fronts. America can be controlled through its water supply, and the water will in large be a part facilitated. The water supply will then be facilitated through the controlling of the American debt. So debt's being used to control water by taking advantage of various levels of government in which defaulting on financial obligations is a practice. So the practice that we've seen in other nations, that we've seen from United Nations reports, that we've seen all over the world pretty much, that practice is coming to America. So we should all, again, apply the pressure where we can, boycott where we can, get in contact with our UN representatives, get in contact with government, make sure that the politicians that we favor and advocate for cleaner drinking water. All right, guys, so that's pretty much it, man. That's all I had, and this is the second video, so I'm not the best at doing these things, but all right, so thank you guys again for coming back, and I hope you have a wonderful, amazing day. Don't forget to hit the like button, don't forget to hit the share button, the subscribe button. Stay tuned for This Is Spiritual, and y'all stay blessed.